and try and get the last name right, Nevena Alexandrova-Stefanova as well, from FAO. The only other thing I will say, before I go to sit down, is that because you appreciate we have very limited time, and I do want to ensure that there's time for interaction with the audience in general discussion later this morning. So all panelists have been invited and asked to confine their initial comments to 3 minutes each. After they've all spoken, we have a little bit of time for collective discussion amongst the panel on any issues that have emerged from your individual presentations. And at that point, I will also invite any comments from our previous speakers in the way of an extended panel discussion. But that will be completed, I hope, by about 11:30, so that we will then have opportunity for you in the audience to engage in discussion with the panel to raise any other issues and interests that you have. So without more delay, we will start at the left with Anne-Marie. 3 minutes each, please.
So I really think that these 4 reports from different regions will have a great impact. It's very important information. And as was said in the beginning, this is a system approach. And I think that is very important. And we also now need an infrastructure to implement the system approach. And we can see that in many countries, many regions, the funding system is very fragmented, and the peering systems for evaluating interdisciplinary research is not very strong. So I think here the European Commission has a very strong competitive advantage to really take the challenge of implementing interdisciplinary research. And there is a need for quite clear missions here, and I hope that we will see a focus on the interfaces between agriculture, food technology and engineering, between food technology, engineering and nutrition, and to the consumer, because it's at these interfaces where we need to put in new innovative research. And I also think that we need to reveal the science behind this food system change, because it's not so obvious. There are a lot of buzzwords, but what is behind? And everything is dependent on each other. So if you work with, there is a lot of fantastic work on plants, but you have to transform this into food, and then you need food science and technology, and you have to have the consumer that should really accept these foods. And if you try to limit water and energy in production, you need a new type of process engineering, which is not here. And a third example, I mean, big data. You talk so much about big data, and it's a fantastic tool that gives enormous possibilities. But you also need to understand that just to have significant statistical correlation will not give you a mechanistic understanding. So beyond this big data, we need to have an understanding for nutrition, for example. We don't know so much on how food is broken down or how nutrients are released and taken up. And that we need to understand. So there are new challenges ahead. So my sort of big sentence is reveal the science behind these. And lastly, but most important, is that we need to attract good scientists to this area, because without a new generation of scientists, we will end up nowhere. So that's maybe also a very important message.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping the time.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm serving a term in the European Parliament for the Greens. I guess I was invited to, basically raise some debates here and bring some pepper into that discussion. I mean, I'm not going to focus on the parts of the report that I admire and that where I think you're perfectly right, like looking at the food system as a whole and not just on agriculture as a separate field and on health on another separate field. So I think that approach is right in time. The representative of the Commission said your report comes timely. Well, we have the leak of the CAP legislative reports or proposals of the Commission already, and it's not really reflecting what your report is aiming for. Yeah? So probably the Commission should have another look before then going into negotiations with the Parliament. I'm currently negotiating the CAP position of the Parliament as a rapporteur for the Greens. To come up to some points, I mean, I read your report, of the most part of it, yesterday evening and today in the morning. As I already said, there's parts which I can really support, but there's others where I have some question marks. Yeah, and you can imagine what this is. This is around pesticides. This is around genetical modification. And let's raise the first question. I mean, I'm a farmer. Yeah, I'm even an organic farmer. I don't know if you knew when you invited me, but I just give you an example that the use of technology is not what decides whether it's useful or not, but it's the mindset in using that technology. We had a serious problem around corn seeds covered by neonicotinoids to secure it from the, I think it's called corn rootworm. And you know, I mean, we had a big debate whether that is, we have to secure the farmers' incomes and whatever, yeah? Or if we should swap to genetically modified plants, which you also propose in your report. And then if you really looked closer to the question, the solution was very easy. Crop rotation solves the problem as a whole. I don't need the chemicals and I don't need the GMOs to solve that problem. It's simply crop rotation that solves it. I give you a second example. We had a debate in the Agri Committee around technical solutions, around reductions of pesticides. And then we had the Liberal MEP that said, well, we don't need that discussion on reducing pesticides because robotics is going to solve it for us. Because there's robots now, they walk through the potato field, and if they find a potato bug, they just spray the bug with pesticides. And I was like, well, if you have a robot that finds the bug, why do you need to spray it with pesticides? Just suck it in and shredder it out. Yeah? So the use of new technologies is always a question of mindset, and there I have several thoughts.
Thank you very much, and I hope we will be able to return to some of those controversies a little bit later this morning. But Adrian.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here and having the opportunity to comment this report, and I find it was really an excellent report. When I was reading it with the idea of having to discuss it, to find some omissions or to really have some disagreement, it was more difficult for me because I think even the point that you raised, I think the report is weighting also the pros and the cons and telling that there is a societal debate that needs to go on and find an agreement on where are we standing. Do we want certain technologies or don't we want them? So I think the report just proposes what technology can achieve or would be able to achieve, and then it's the second step in going and discussing, do we want to have it or not? So I'm representative of the Joint Research Center, and as the report also points out, there's a wealth of work that is being done at the JRC, and it's not the place and the time now to list all these activities. So I invite everybody to go to the link that is in the report and see what the JRC is doing and can help towards coming to a sustainable food and nutrition security system. A few points that I would like to raise, though, is the importance of a food system sustainability assessment. So this is the interface between the science and the policy, and digesting the scientific evidence in a way that the policy decisions can be made really based on that evidence available. And so there are two steps that are required. One is to put all the evidence into an indicator system so that you really have a comprehensive assessment of all the different dimensions that you need to look at when you're doing the assessment. So it's the environment, it's nutrition and health, it's the economic dimension as well, and it's the ethical dimension that goes to what is the global impact, what is the distribution within societies and within the world, and it's also animal welfare that might play a role here. And then the second step is to doing foresight analysis, so putting all the knowledge that we have into trying to see how the future could develop. That's one, and then B, to see what policies can be implemented in addition to what we think will be the changes, and try to make the best out of it. And then at the end, the report shows that there are a lot of steps to go where we might have synergies between our different policy goals or societal goals, but there might also be trade-offs to be taken, and those depends on the world views that the different people have. And so there must be a really transparent way of putting the science in a way that it can be digested by those who are taking the decisions, and making open what are their world views, and then arguing the decisions that they are making. Another point I wanted to make is the report talks about food production, agriculture, and the farm scale. And I think we should maybe move beyond the farm and agriculture and including food production as such, because there are also land-less technologies, and you were mentioning a few also in the report. For instance, alternative proteins that might be cultivated in the laboratory. And it's again, a question, I think, technologically, that will not be a big problem to achieve it, but the question is again about societal acceptance. What of those technologies do we want and what don't we want, and to having the debate and seeing where can we go. When talking about landless production, there was the point raised about the competition of land between food and energy and other ecosystem services. I think the energy-food topic might also be looked at from a different angle. If society achieves a decarbonization of society, that could open further ways of going towards a sustainable food and nutrition security system, allowing sustainably some of the technologies which now would be forbidden because of too high energy use. A third point that I might want to raise is the importance of the food chain actors. Food chain actors like food processing retailers, all those companies, they have a lot of contributions that they can make to make the food system more sustainable, but they have also a shared responsibility of really being engaged. So it's not just that they can contribute, but they should also contribute based on the principle of shared responsibility, because I once have read the word a supermarketization that is going on in some societies. So they have significant power, and it's also important that they are aware of that, and that gives them also some responsibility of using that power in a sustainable way. And the last point I think that I can raise in the time that I have available is the issue of animal welfare. You raise it in your report, weighing some pros and cons. There are technologies that where animal welfare and environment and nutrition might go hand in hand, but there might be a lot of others where it does not. And I think it's not only about new technologies, how they position themselves in that debate, but also how societal view on animal welfare might change in the future. I think there are some production systems today that might not be acceptable in the future. And this is a point where I think a global consensus might also be needed, and I've seen also the idea of international panel on food and nutrition security, whether it should be more science-based or more intergovernmental. And I think this might be a topic where really an intergovernmental debate would be helpful to come to a consensus, which would be really, really and hugely difficult to reach. But that is the essence of such a process. If it were easy, then there would be no sense in starting it. So I think as a conclusion, science and technology, they can do a lot, and they will be able to do even more in the future, but it's really, really important to engage the public and society, and we have to start that really early, because this is something that you think in generations, and if you want to be fit for 2030, 2050, and having a sustainable food system, is really the time now to think how to make the public aware of that and teach them or tell them or discuss with them what the options are. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Raised a lot of good points, which again we can pick up a little bit. Alexandra.
Thank you very much. I think that what this report brings, and also I think this discussion and very interesting talks that we today heard is the increasing need for more integration across the food system in general. I think what this report really brings is on one hand showing very specific opportunities for increasing food and nutritional security in Europe based on scientific development and also game-changing technology on the one hand, but on the other it shows challenges that are arising from diversity of stakeholders that are involved in agricultural food chains. And also representing a European technology platform that brings together scientists, industry and farming community, we quite often witness the differences, the different approaches coming from diverse actor groups. This is all connected with the different environments they are coming from, different knowledge, different expertise they bring, different timelines, but still trying to aim the same, trying to provide enough sufficient and healthy food produced in a sustainable way for society. So looking at all, at least some of the opportunities and the challenges that we are facing that are excellently represented and described in the report that was mentioned already, talking about digitalization, but also approaches and innovation in genome editing in plants and animals. I think it is extremely important to stress that in this more and more complex food system approach, it is important to connect the dots that already existing. It is important to understand and figure out how we can bring those different stakeholders together and increase collaboration and cooperation. It might be the case that there are a lot of partnerships needed on a different angles and at different stages of the food systems that could improve the situation and pave the way forward.
Thank you. And finally, for these initial panel presentations, Nevena.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the world today is facing unprecedented and escalating challenges that the human history never faced before. And they affect agriculture and food systems in Europe as well. So today we face demographic, environmental, climate change, energy, and biodiversity challenges among a list of 12 challenges, actually, that FAO has identified in a recent publication from last year, Future of Food and Agriculture. Demographics. We know that in 30 years' time, we have to feed 3 more billion people in this world, and we will feed those people with less farmers, because less people will live in rural areas, and not all of them will be farmers. In addition, in Europe, we have the trend of aging the farmers, so our farmers will be about 59 years old in 30 years, which means that they really need support from research and innovations in order to produce the food that we will eat. Climate change. If climate change is not addressed, there are predictions that 35 to 122 million people will be thrown back to poverty, in addition to some more, because we are not able by now to reverse the trend of increasing poverty. So we will not have the luxury to have cheap energy sources anymore, including in the use of agricultural sector. Biodiversity loss is already 60%. Land use and land degradation. In Europe, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have available land for agriculture. In addition, the land is heavily degraded, and about 80% of the land is in use for livestock alone, for pastures and to produce feed for livestock. What we know today is that tomorrow we will need 60% more food, 50% more energy, and 40% more water in order to be able to feed our population. Of course, Europe has a significant role to play in global food security, but also to feed European population. Moreover, we have certain commitments. Our government had hard commitments to end the hunger by 2030, that is tomorrow, to end all forms of malnutrition in 2030, to double the agricultural production and increase, to double the income of smallholder farmers by 2030, and to leave no one behind. So how they can do that? It is very obvious, and it's an imperative, that we highlight the research and innovation agenda. So such challenges, ladies and gentlemen, require a high political stance and rapid political actions in order to improve the situation. And the role of science is more and more to provide the solid evidence base for politicians to act. Science cannot afford anymore, any longer, to be politically correct. And reading the report, actually, I really find really clear messages that are provided to policymakers within the not only food systems approach, but sustainable food systems approach. We have climate smart agriculture concept in there, food waste and loss decrease, flexible regulations for technologies, including biotechnologies. That is something that really needs to be highlighted, because the report is not afraid to go into socially controversial debates about technologies, and this is really what I really admire. However, what I like here is more assertiveness of the clear messages. The messages are there, but the stands are not. For instance, we can discuss organic agriculture. Organic agriculture is using much more land resources. It's probably more healthy, but not necessarily safe and not necessarily nutritious. So there are trade-offs, and the science has to define those trade-offs and have a dialogue with all people concerned whether those trade-offs are acceptable. So maybe indeed we will need to move forward to new production systems that actually take off of the good things developed before, let's say in organic, in other eco-agricultural systems approach, but include more science. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to finish with one African proverb that you all know. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But actually, I believe in the digital era, this proverb is not any longer valid, because we need to go both fast and far. So what we have to do is really to strengthen our national policies, including in research and innovation, including taking into account smallholders, but also together, including not only European Union academies, but also other 23 countries in Europe that are actually part of the pan-European space, but were not very well reflected in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. You've all raised some interesting and some provocative points. We could, of course, spend a lot of time debating many of these issues for a long while. We don't have the luxury of doing that because I want to open up the discussion to the audience. Are there any immediate points that any of you would like to come back on very briefly? And in that context, can I also invite any of our previous speakers who would like to comment on any points from made by the panelists before we go into our general discussion? You can, of course, reserve your interventions for part of that discussion. As I say, I'd like to get on to that as soon as possible, but if there are any immediate responses, now's the time. Nope. Well, that's wonderful because I can then now open up the discussion more broadly to allow everybody here for the next few minutes their opportunity to contribute with regard to what they've already heard or to raise other issues. I just allow myself the luxury of one comment on what we've heard so far this morning and to remind you of something that Professor Termerlen said right at the beginning. The focus of this EASAC report, the focus of our discussions today, very much been on Europe, particularly the European Union, but actually slightly wider in Europe where we've been able to do that. But as Professor Termerlen mentioned, this EASAC work is part of a global project, and we are now, the phase has developed where the things that we've been talking about today are being fed into a global analysis and synthesis. So please be mindful as you think about the issues in the European context, or also to consider how you might advise us to identify key issues for further exploration at the global level. Particularly, how can the EU and Europe help in those global discussions and global action? We don't have the luxury of just considering Europe as an island on its own. But indeed, a lot of the policy issues and most of the evidence that we've talked about have been derived from Europe. So obviously very much welcome the further focus on those issues. At this point, for the rest of the morning, I will now turn over to Joachim von Braun again to manage and moderate the general discussion and indeed to close our session in due course. Do you want it from there? So thank you very much.